I am Olivia Wood. I work at Fail Better Games as a writer, narrative designer, editor, and content manager, and support, and because we do everything. I was recently acknowledged by a BAFTA scheme for my editing and writing work in video games. And this is Fail Better Games. We're a London-based indie studio and are nearly 10 years old. That's old in the games industry, right? We are known for Fallen London, Sunless Sea, and Sunless Skies, which we launched in January this year. Sunless Sea and Sunless Skies are downloadable premium games. We self-publish them using a combination of Kickstarter and early access. But I'm going to focus on Fallen London. Why? Fallen London is fairly unusual. It's a 10-year-old free-to-play browser game that is still profitable. It's also entirely built with narrative. There is no story gameplay divide. I'm here to explain how we adapted our free-to-play browser game to enable an increased, reliable income stream for the company in the long term. To explain how we monetized Fallen London and the challenges we face in running it, I'll need to explain its design. In Fallen London, London has been dragged underground into a world where death isn't permanent, cats can talk, and ominous space bats are de facto rulers of the city. It's a world of light horror and dark humor. Our players adopt characters who have come down from the surface to London underground. There, they live out their lives as a member of Victorian society, engaging in romances, crimes, dangerous escapades, and occasionally taking tea with devils. Fallen London is a universe in the capital U Marvel sense. It is both the cornerstone of our business and launchpad for standalone sequels. So, how is it designed? The game is very firmly interactive fiction. All gameplay is in the form of narrative choices. Equal weight is given to the choice to punch a thug or to the choice to gossip with your aunt, probably over a plate of fresh scones. However, Fallen London is not branching narrative. There is not one mostly linear plot that splits at key points to possibly rejoin later on. Instead, the underlying world model is one of thousands of variables that we call qualities. So if I slip and mix up the two, I'm talking about the same thing. We can look these up from anywhere else in the game. Content is unlocked by combinations of variables. Each piece of content contains a choice, and each choice in the game can change a variable. The use of variables means that we can surprise players with callbacks to decisions they have made in earlier content in an entirely separate section of the game. And the variables themselves are narrative tools. This image is a crop from my own character. These are all variables. I'm dangerous and persuasive. I'm a diplomat and a spy. I'm also an agent of the devils. So how is the game played? Players explore the city of Fallen London. There is content in every area of the map. It all feeds into a sense of exploration, so that players are not just exploring stories within a space, they're exploring the space itself. While players traverse the space of the game is mainly about their exploration of narrative. Content can be in the form of brief vignettes or storylines, which are the closest analog to quests of varying length. Some content is served to the player in a randomized way, via their card deck. Some is always available until the player becomes ineligible for it. Here, clicking on the card deck reveals 4 options for the player to dig into. Once I've chosen a card, I'm presented with a snippet of narrative and a choice. Here's an example. The player witnesses a scuffle. In response, do they assist the lady, the revolutionary, or do they assist the urchin who's doing a much worse job at pickpocketing than he thinks? Of course, I'd assist the urchin because I'm not a monster. The choice changes variables. The player has become more persuasive. They have another favor from the urchins. They've been given a variable that triggers a clandestine rendezvous elsewhere in the game. So variables underpin everything in the game, and we track everything from the fairly traditional quality of wounds to inciting a simian revenge. So what you have with Fallen London is a complex system of interlocking stories and vignettes that track player behavior to enable callbacks to almost any choice in the game. So what is Fallen London's place in Failbetter's business, and why is it so important? It is our only free-to-play game. We primarily produce downloadable pre-premium games, Sun the Sea and Sun the Skies. We spend years working on these games, and until we launch, we do not know how they will do. At the same time, our company does not want to have to crunch, and we want to exist in the long term. Fallen London de-risks our premium games. It ensures that we have a reliable income stream that insulates us from the boom and bust nature of premium games. So how did we set up Fallen London in such a way that it would support the company? Well, originally, it had a more traditional free-to-play setup. We have an in-game currency called Fate. Once a player had bought Fate for real-world money, it could be used for a variety of one-off purchases throughout the game. It could also purchase certain improvements to the gameplay experience for a month, but it didn't auto-renew. In a way, it was like a proto-subscription. We called it Exceptional Friendship. How can the player spend Fate? What are those one-off purchases? The stories within Fallen London are explored via a series of choices. Each choice takes an action. The game only allows a limited number of actions per day. Players can use Fate to refresh their actions. They can also use it to refresh the opportunity deck, to play more of the randomized deck content. And they can use Fate to open Fate-locked choices. Sometimes these result in items that are hard or impossible to get with free content. Sometimes they reveal unexplored lore. The player can also open Fate-locked storylines. Some storylines are simply not free. Here, the golden-colored choice is Fate-locked. It's part of a storyline about tracking a serial killer, Jack of Smiles. If you take that choice, for a while you, the player, will become that serial killer. These Fate monetization options are all still in the game. The proto-subscription, the one-off monthly package, is not. Before explaining what we turned it into, I'll briefly clarify what it was. The player could buy this monthly package for 20 Fate, which came to about $4. This meant that the player would no longer be exposed to adverts. They would also get a second action candle and a higher total action pool, meaning they'd be able to play more each day. But we were missing a trick. We decided to change the Exceptional Friendship into a rolling monthly subscription paid for with real-world currency. In 2015, for a game that could be played on mobile, this was unusual. We also raised the price. It's now $7 a month. What did we do to sell this to the players to make it seem that this was worthwhile? We added a limited-time subscriber-exclusive story each month. We judged that we could increase the price because of the perceived high value of our stories. These subscriber stories can be bought individually later for Fate, but for an equivalent cost higher than if the player had bought a subscription. Thus, the subscriber stories continue to generate revenue beyond the initial subscription. This is the art from an exceptional story from last year, Little Pandemonium, which was very popular and quite horrific. Anyway, it turns out our decision to implement monthly subscriptions was definitely the right one. Now, a large minority of our monthly active users are subscribers, and when combined with the Fate-paid aspects of the game, Failbetter has a reliable income that both supports the development of Fallen London and enables long-term planning of other ventures. It takes the risk out of our premium products by massively reducing our monthly burn and gives us a fan base we can point towards our other work. Having a monthly subscriber story has benefits beyond the income. They let us experiment, as they provide a consistent feedback loop with our audience. They let us learn what players like so that we can create more of that kind of content for both the subscribers and the free game. The subscription stories give us a regular opportunity to highlight different parts of the setting. They enable us to add lore to fill in gaps or to create new areas to later use for free content, so they're very efficient. And they drive engagement with free content. Players particularly like their choices having an impact on the free content of Fallen London. A subscriber story need only unlock one repeatable vignette in the free part of the game, but that's enough. It reminds the players of adventures their characters have been through, and it respects the choices they've made in their stories. By having free content reflect choices made in paid content, players feel like the decisions they made matter and that they last beyond subscriptions. It feels fair. So how do you manage such a game and keep it profitable? There are three main areas to address. The first is the sheer volume of writing and designing. The base game needs free content to draw players in, to make them feel that the game is worth investing in, financially or emotionally. But even though we have built up a huge amount of free content, we have to keep adding more. This ensures that Fallen London doesn't stagnate, that it continues to feel like a thriving city to those who don't have a subscription but might get one, and to those who have a subscription but need something to keep them engaged between each month's subscriber content. We add, very roughly, 10,000 words of free content a year. That does not include the content we write for our seasonals. We also have lore-based seasonal content to give the in-game world a sense of time passing. While we reuse some of the content, we still add about 20,000 words of free seasonal content a year. Then we have the subscriber stories. They're another 100,000 words a year. That's a lot of writing, especially for a content team of 3 people who, at the same time, in 2 years, were also making a premium game containing 800,000 words. That's a content burden. So how do we manage that? Under these kind of pressures, it is easier to create stories within specific parameters than to go away and write a Fallen London story. So, our subscription stories have themes, 3 months dedicated to a particular aspect of Fallen London life. It makes breaking down the vast amount of lore easier. It also gives every 3 subscription stories an external arc, so that while a player needn't play all 3, they're encouraged to do so. We have built Fallen London as a deep living world. Instead of creating a set of stories, we've created a setting for stories. The game of Fallen London is the world in which all the stories are set. This means that the world can be lore-rich, and we can leave a lot of questions unanswered without making it feel that we're creating mysteries for mystery's sake, or don't even know what's happening ourselves. But when we come back to those areas looking for inspiration to write, it's already there, in the layers of lore we've already set up. We don't treat story as linear plot. Our game is a place, and players explore stories within that place. This all means that repeatable content has a real-world analogue in the daily grind, and that adds to the life of the city of Fallen London. It has to be well written, but because it serves a narrative, world-building, and role-playing function, it's possible to create content that players deliberately set out to complete many times, rather than just view as filler and grind. For example, players can act as a temporary governor of Port Carnelian. Many players actively seek to raise their successful terms as governor as high as they can, playing the content over and over. To some, it's a score to boast about, but for others, it is part of their character's career. There are several periods in the year when we release free content, often with monetized aspects. These are our seasonal events that I mentioned before. They are inspired by real-world holidays, but given our own Fallen London spin. For example, in December, we have an advent calendar and some content revolving around Mr. Sachs, who is an eldritch approximation of Santa Claus. Mr. Sachs visits every day of the 12 days of Christmas, demanding different presents from the player. He's both exceedingly popular and fun to write. It's also vital to use a number of freelancers. We have benefited from seeking out those who have different backgrounds and experiences to the in-house team. By doing so, we can not only appeal to a range of audiences and players who might not otherwise be interested in our work, but we regularly re-inspire the in-house content team. Freelance stories refresh and enrich our lore and world in a way that has benefits far beyond the writer's individual story. If the Fairbetter team had to write for 10 years on the same game without the creative refreshment diverse freelancers bring, it would be extremely difficult to maintain the excitement, mystery, and joy we try to pass on to our players. The next challenge is that of converting players to the subscription. You need an enticing free game to whet players' appetites for the stories only available via subscription. The free game gives players stories that suggest mysteries, that get them invested in particular characters, such as the captivating princess here, who is Queen Victoria's most unsettling daughter. Or there are groups you could get involved with, such as the revolutionaries, who seek to turn out the stars and plunge the world into eternal night. As you do. Subscription stories offer deeper insight into lore, or more time with popular characters or groups. They also offer a space for a bingeable storyline. They are never driven by randomized cards, and so can be explored and completed in one long play session. And because all our stories involve choices, there are many routes through the narratives, often with significantly different consequences. Players gather to talk about the options, to discover what they had to leave unseen, and in doing so, spread the excitement to non-subscribers who can be lured in. Our narratives tempt players to buy stories, but it is the trust we've built with them that makes many willing to commit to subscriptions rather than one-off story purchases. We earn the players' trust in several ways. Narratively, we like to leave lore-based mysteries and puzzles in the game, but we reveal enough that the players know that there are answers and that we aren't just hand-waving something complex away. And we do write stories that eventually confirm or disprove their hypotheses. They know that when it comes to our writing, we'll play fair. Subscribers are aware of the type of narrative we write. It's the shape of the story they will experience. So even if a subscriber prefers 1 month subscriber story to another, they do not receive an unpleasant surprise that could drive them to go through the unsubscription process. We also have a fairly unusual audience, one that rejects the gacha gambling mechanics you sometimes see in free-to-play, and so we just don't use them. The vast majority of Fallen London is free. It's possible to have a good narrative experience without ever buying Fate. We never fate lock mechanically optimal choices or force a player to pay Fate to avoid permanent failure. Our audience seems to appreciate this general approach, and as a result, are generous and supportive. Where possible, we make the players' choices meaningful ones. This means that, as well as them having emotional significance at the point of making, they can resonate beyond the story itself. Decisions have permanence. The time and energy the player invests in making those choices does not dissipate the moment they move on. We respect their investment and try to recognize it. If the players trust your intentions and design and appreciate the writing you're selling, they will buy a narrative subscription. The final challenge, gaining and maintaining fans. However good your writing is, you have to look after the technical side of the game. Fallen London has been around for 10 years, and websites have not always been pretty. We recently revamped the site and added a significant number of quality of life improvements. We also optimized it for mobile, so that the players have more opportunities to play and a more streamlined experience. This is on top of day-to-day maintenance and performance upgrades. It's important to tell the players that we're still there, listening to them 10 years later, and even when simultaneously working on other games. In a role-playing game, you want to leave as much space for role-playing as possible. We start from the very moment of character creation, when we offer the player character a gender choice, or to opt out of it entirely. But the opt-out fits the setting. They aren't forced out of genre to take it. Our design factors in roleplay. If there is a repeatable piece of content for pacing, it will make narrative and role-playing sense to repeat it. We try not to assume why the player made the narrative choice that they did, and we avoid suggesting the player character's emotions. If one player wants to swoon at the scene of a crime and another gloat in the gory details of it, that's absolutely fine. We'll lay out the scene of the crime and let them do the rest of the work. So, in our design and in our writing, we strive to leave space for the player imagination. We do the same with our lore. We build deep layers of lore into the game, revealing only hints at a time. Of those mysteries fully resolved in-game, a large number can only be fully understood when players have seen all of several pieces of content. Because of the size of the game and the many alternate choices, this encourages players to share things that they've learned and debate hypotheses. Not only does this drive gameplay and maintain engagement, but the discussions can draw in less dedicated players or even those who haven't yet played. I've been looking forward to this slide. Our content creation can be very responsive. This gives us the opportunity to react in-game to fan discussions outside the game. It's how we acquired a vignette about buying excessive numbers of weasels. Is accidentally purchasing 500 weasels an appropriate reason to contact Failbetter support? Chris Gardner, our narrative director, just happened to be browsing Reddit at the time of this posted. In a bout of whimsy, he created a small amount of new content in response. The rest of the thread was delighted. And it's a good example of what we do to keep our fans engaged. It made the players feel heard. It fostered community. It demonstrates how the content team can be responsive. And it makes the content team gleeful because this is just really enjoyable content to write. We put a great deal of effort into communicating clearly and directly with our fans. Any fan who reaches out to us with something constructive gets a personal response, and feedback is always passed on to the relevant teams. The devs themselves post in the forums. We lay out business reasoning for decisions as clearly as we can. We trust our players to be understanding, and they seem to appreciate that trust and respond to it in a really positive way. We take a similar approach when handling support. Support is not hived off to a separate part of the business. Tickets are passed directly to the dev best placed to fix the cause of the problem. There is a direct contact between the player with an issue and the person best able to fix it. Not only does this result in a high satisfaction, but it gives the players a chance to see a little of the people behind the game, to see that we're mostly human, however horrific. And it provides an opportunity for developer whimsy. This is an interaction between a player trying to acquire a lost Kickstarter Steam key and Les, our senior QA specialist, who's in the audience over there. It might have taken her a little longer to respond in kind, but it was a really nice recognition of the player's original effort. And sometimes doing this kind of thing can diffuse negative player experiences. So if they're quite angry and you respond in a way that shows you're a person, it often makes things better and get a lot of praise from people originally being quite rude. So it all works. Our fans are absolutely engaged. And these are just a few examples of responses to a fan competition we ran. I'm always impressed by what they do out of love for our work. And I would totally wear that dress. It's decorated with the correspondence, which is the in-law language of the stars, and it tends to have a conflagratory effect on the reader. So that's a dress with built-in self-defense. So what should you take away from this? By adding a narrative-based monthly subscription to Fallen London, we made a reliable income stream that supports all the work of Failbetter Games. The benefits of having a game like Fallen London extend further than just its own success. It supports the company so that any premium products we make are de-risked. We do not have to rely on them being a wild success. It serves as a narrative testbed. We can use subscription feedback to discover what kinds of stories players wish to explore in Fallen London and our other games. It provides us with a universe in which to base our other games. It inspires our premium products. And it has led to our Kickstarter success. Fallen London fans contributed to our Kickstarter and to the publicity surrounding it. This meant that in 2017, the Sun in the Skies Kickstarter had over 10,000 backers, was fully funded on Kickstarter in 4 hours, and reached 377% funding. It was the third most funded video game Kickstarter that year. There definitely is real value in subscription offerings and free-to-play games. To make it work, you need to figure out what works for you. But if you're working with narratives, build an iterative loop for the content. In our case, the subscription stories and after-the-fact engagement with the audience enables us to gauge the story's success and informs the content roadmap. You need good, free content to establish a reputation and to support the subscription package. Free players still have a great deal of value, especially if you also produce other games. But your best stuff should be for money. There needs to be a reason to subscribe, after all. And finally, respect your audience. If you design and write appreciating the investment players make in your products, they'll be able to tell. Player trust is vital to long-term success. So before I end, I just wanted to let you know that Failbetter is currently hiring. We're looking for a senior gameplay programmer, which can be fully remote, which is fairly rare, so go for it. And we also need a producer. The producer will need to come to the London office at least 2 days a week, so you'll probably have to be in the UK. But if you're interested, please go to our website. Thank you.